So briefly, just to remind you what I mean, how the program how we want to have it, and actually how we adjusted it. So Dusana, she's not here. Can I do it like this? Yeah. So she's not here, and we started a bit more relaxed now with the timing because we have a bit more time. So basically what I'm going to do is to talk about what I wanted to talk about it maybe with a bit more time, and also maybe we have time for questions in between, and actually include, try to include some of the points I believe Dusana wanted to make. And actually she gave me a few pointers where she said, or wrote better, maybe you can talk about this slide and that slide and that slide. So I put them in, then later on I just have to remember what they were about. So let's see. Yes, so we only, as I said, we only found out this morning. And so, okay, but one more point I wanted to make actually is, so we'll have now a bit more than an hour, so it's quite relaxed. Then we'll have the poster blitz, where we have selected a few posters where the presenters will give a brief advert, a teaser of what their posters are going to show, so we get a bit of an idea. And we give this a bit more time because we have more time. The poster session and then the displays, I think we have 8 mindfulness providers in the foyer, so who are happy also to talk to you about what they offer, and have some displays there as well, so you may want to have a look at this. And then we have a few more talks to give a bit of a taste to how what the mindfulness research is like in Liverpool. And at the end then we'll wrap up with more discussion. That's roughly what we are planning to do. And so let's start here. So actually what I want to start with is number 10. A while back, meanwhile, these gentlemen and actually some ladies also got involved. They started the Mindfulness All-Party Parliamentary Group. Has anyone ever heard about this? Yeah, some of you have. It's an all-party group. This sounds great. Yeah, so party all the time. That's how I understand it, at least. So a group basically that with the idea across all political parties to see whether and how mindfulness can be brought into society. And just a month ago, well, on 20th of October, they published the report, Mindful Nation UK. And this report, yeah, that's how it looks like when it's printed. And this report, actually, it covers 4 areas. Yeah? So it considers mindfulness in relation to health, mindfulness in relation to education, mindfulness in relation to the workplace, and mindfulness in relation to prisons, criminal justice system in general. Yeah? And as this is quite new and maybe not everyone had the chance to read the whole report, and we thought actually it might make sense to just briefly highlight some of the main recommendations they made. Yeah? So I only planned 2-3 minutes for it, now maybe 1 minute more. Yeah? So regarding health, actually what they say in this report is that they recommend to increase the availability of mindfulness-based cognitive therapy within the NHS. And the whole report, actually, it is a combination of case studies, of trying to summarize all the research within the different fields that is there, and taking different perspectives on this. And basically they say that there's such a high demand within the NHS, but MBCT is not widely enough available, and in the report you have all the numbers and so on. I didn't put it here, and this recommendation is actually based on the fact that there's very strong research, I would say, very strong evidence that mindfulness-based cognitive therapy is effective for helping people suffering from recurrent depressions after at least 3 episodes of depression. So actually a very specific indication, yeah, and there we have clear evidence, yeah, with very well-controlled, large-scale studies that show this. And based on this, actually this recommendation is made, and then it's also acknowledged basically that there is not enough provision within the NHS, and the suggestion or the recommendation to use the IAPT training program to train mindfulness-based teachers. Yeah, and another recommendation is to for NICE, yeah, the National Institute for Clinical Healthcare. Oh, they changed their name. I always forget it. Catherine, help me. Excellent. Okay, thank you. So the previous name was nicer, was easier to remember. So basically, they recommend that there should be more better review and stronger review of the evidence for MBCT, also for other health conditions than just recurrent depression. Yeah? So I looked a bit into the report. And as I am a scientist, I'm always interested in the completeness of the evidence. And one thing I want to point out, while all the positive recommendations from NICE are mentioned, the warnings are not in the report. So I want to emphasize that there are warnings. Actually, NICE says, do not routinely offer mindfulness-based interventions or supportive therapy to treat social anxiety disorders. Yeah? So we often hear NICE recommends mindfulness. NICE doesn't recommend mindfulness for everything. Yeah, so I think it is important to remember this. And actually for me, it is not a question when does it work, when does it not work, but it's more a question to be alert to the fact that actually the recommendations from NICE are very, very specific. Yeah, and we shouldn't, at least not from a scientific perspective, use these recommendations to support all claims of effectiveness of mindfulness-based interventions. Even within NICE, it is clear that it's not always nice. Yeah? So, yes? I'm not familiar with the evidence around social anxiety disorder. That actually does seem to suggest also, though, that sometimes it might be, yeah. Say again? It's It could well be. Yeah? So this I'm just highlighting this and actually also to make the point that we need, actually on the one hand, also what is said in the report, that more research is needed, that we have to look at different areas of evidence. And I just want to highlight that we cannot currently use NICE recommendations to justify every use of mindfulness. Yeah? And I think the report is also very clear on this, that so far there isn't sufficient evidence to do so. Yeah? But here this is for me it is a good example that we have to be more specific, and actually that we have to be open to the idea that maybe the standard MBCT program or other programs might not be the right thing for every condition. Maybe they are, but at least the scientific evidence that has been reviewed so far doesn't support such a conclusion at the moment. Yeah? So, and my argument as a scientist, of course, would be we need more research, we need more funding to do to see where the evidence is, and also to become more specific which kind of intervention for which situation is appropriate. Yeah? So, and maybe just one more point as we have the time regarding health. Actually, the evidence is strongest. Yeah? So although I made some critical points, in general I would say most of the research regarding mindfulness-based interventions, whatever they are, has been carried out in the area, can roughly, here subsumed under health, and with all the other areas actually the evidence is much thinner so far. Yeah? So education, for instance, there are a few studies, but so far nothing large scale. Yeah, the Wellcome Trust is now funding a large-scale project carried out by the Oxford Mindfulness Center. It's about to start now. But where actually the recommendation is for the Department for Education to support the pioneering of mindfulness in schools. Yeah? and also to fund the training of teachers. So that's the recommendation that is there. Regards the evidence so far, there is some evidence, but not very strong. And of course, as those of you involved know, that there are different mindfulness programs for school and education in general out there. And then one has actually to see which programs might be the right ones. Yeah? Regarding the workplace, there is even less evidence. Yeah? It is, I would say, it is easier to do research in schools than in the workplace because of the general situation in the workplace. And what is recommended in the report is to promote the use of mindfulness in the workplace and to kind of develop good practice guidelines. Yeah? And then also for the Department for Business to commission research in this field, and maybe also to promote the use of mindfulness programs in the public sector in general. Yeah? And another recommendation is for the NIHR to fund research regarding mindfulness in occupational health. Regarding the criminal justice system, also a little bit of research has been done, and the practice is going on there, and this is reviewed in there. And one obvious suggestion is to offer or to implement MBCT for the treatment of recurrent depression, also in the criminal justice system. And of course, this is very, very reasonable. There are high rates of depression within the criminal justice system, and MBCT is shown to be effective in this situation. So it would be reasonable to recommend something like this. And then, of course, also what is missing so far is solid, high quality research, and also there the recommendation is to fund this. Yeah? So this is just a very quick rush through this. So if you're interested in, during the break, we have copies of the report out there at the reception for all of you to take. If you prefer the electronic version, you can go to the website, the Mindfulness Initiative, where you can download your electronic copy. Yeah? So I just wanted to alert you to this, as this is such a new development, I would say. So now I include, I move on now to the part I wanted to talk about with a slide from Dusana. Yeah? So, because I thought he would be introducing what mindfulness is about. I assume that most people know it, yeah, but here is just a description that is often cited, probably the most cited description of mindfulness. Some people say a definition. John Kabat-Zinn always said, no, I didn't mean it to be a definition. It's just a way of describing it, yeah? And so cited again and again. So it is about the awareness that emerges through paying attention on purpose in the present moment, non-judgmentally, to the unfolding of experience moment by moment. Yeah? So mindfulness has something to do with paying attention, doing this in a purposeful way, doing this non-judgmentally, and of course in the moment. But I mean, in one way, actually, we can only pay attention in the moment. Yeah? So, I mean, maybe I paid attention in the past, but I cannot do this now. Yeah? I did maybe in the past. Yeah? So, but the point of saying in the present moment is actually to consciously and purposefully relate to the current experience, yeah? And to be aware actually of the experience right now. Yeah? That's the way how John Kabat-Zinn puts it, and just to mention it briefly, this is a kind of a translation from the Buddhist spiritual practice into a secular language and into a secular approach that is actually removed from the whole context it used to be practiced in within Buddhism. Yeah? So now I just want to share a bit of the thoughts that I have about this. So when thinking about mindfulness-based interventions, as many of you will know, it is particularly being used in the health context, and here I just listed a few areas where it is used and related review papers that review some of the evidence. So the prevention of recurrent depression, I talked about it, anxiety, mood problems, chronic pain, somatization disorders, mental health of cancer patients, general stress management, of course, and so on. There's a long list of areas where mindfulness interventions are being used. Yeah? And then if one looks at what these interventions are, they all start, almost all start with M, so MBSR, mindfulness-based stress reduction, mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, mindfulness-based eating, mindfulness-based pain management, mindfulness-based stress reduction for teens, mindfulness-based relapse prevention, mindfulness-based childcare and parenting, mindfulness-based elderly care. Yeah? So I think it's the first time I get through the whole thing. And there are more, yeah? So you can extend it in both directions. And so and as we've seen on the slide before, as is stated in the Mindful Nation UK report and so on, the understanding is that at least for some situations, for some conditions, such mindfulness-based interventions are effective. Yeah? So they improve the condition of the patients, of the participants. So, and then if we look at these different interventions, of course they have different names, they partially do different things, but also there's a lot that many of them have in common. So most of them have components that often are called psychoeducation. So if you think about mindfulness-based stress reduction, then it might be particularly for the participants to understand the psychological and physiological stress response and how this relates to their experience and so on. It often includes relaxation exercises, then body awareness, for instance, in forms of the body scan. Then on the other side, sometimes stretching exercises are in there, yoga can be in there. Often very important is the experiential exploration, so basically that within the group context, the participants discuss their experience, in particular also with mindfulness practice, but also how it relates to their life and things like this. And then there are different ways of meditating, concentrative meditations, sometimes something referred to as open monitoring practices, breath awareness practice, and so on. Yeah? So when looking at this, actually, I start thinking, and actually, when I wonder whether whether it makes sense actually to say, or whether it is justified to say, when we see these positive effects, they are down to mindfulness. Yeah? So does the M have to be in there? Yeah? So, because if I look at all these programs, so far I could say, well, all the change are just because of the psychoeducative component. Or they're all just because there are so nice stretching exercises in there. Yeah? So, from the evidence, as long as I'm just looking at the effects of such a complex program, the only thing I can say, this complex program that happens to be called MBSR, MBCT, you name it, yeah? I named it. From the evidence, I can only say that this program is effective, if it is. Yeah? So whether it is due to the mindfulness practice in there, from such studies, I cannot say. From my own experience, I would say it is quite likely. Yeah? So I don't want to exclude this at all. But regarding the scientific evidence, if we are investigating these programs, we cannot say. It can be any aspect of it. It can be 3 aspects of it. It can be 5 aspects of it. It can be the particular mix of it, but it doesn't necessarily have to be the mindfulness practice in there. Yeah? So, in one way, one can say, I don't care, because the main thing is I have clients, I have patients, they don't feel well, or they have some health condition or whatever, and after 8 weeks of the program, they are much better. And whether it was a psychoeducation or the stretching or the mindfulness practice, I don't care, as long as they get better. And I think this is a completely valid perspective. Yeah? And I would even argue that it makes more sense to have complex programs than to have very simple programs, because it's more likely that the participant will find something that fits for them. Yeah? So, but as a scientist, I say, well, this doesn't convince me, yeah, scientifically it has something to do with the M. Yeah? So, so what do we actually mean with mindfulness? All of this, or parts of it, or which aspect of it? And there are different ways now how one can approach this scientifically. Yeah? For instance, there are studies carried out in Bangor and in collaboration between Oxford and Bangor using the dismantling approach. You know, one says, actually, let's deliver the same program and we just take out everything related to mindfulness meditation practice and compare it to the full program. You know, we just take out the one component we think is essential, and if we take this out and then the effectiveness disappears, this would be an evidence. Yeah? So this would be one approach. We take, well, I in particular take a different approach, and I say, let's only take what I consider the core things, the mindfulness practice, and see if this has an effect. Yeah? This is for me of particular interest because this might allow actually to offer mindfulness programs in a much more flexible way. If we can show which of these components have what kind of effect. Yeah? And in principle, one could start then with any of these components, but of course I would think starting with one that is essential for the mindfulness practice is meaningful. And so what I did a lot in my research, in our research, is actually to start with a simple mindful breath awareness practice, where I would say that it includes the core components of how one practices mindfulness, but not much more than that. Yeah? So, and if we can show that this has an effect, yeah, and then can study what the specific effects are, then actually I think it goes a long way, and it creates a good basis and actually for studying also combined effects and things like this. Yeah? So, when thinking about mindful breath awareness practice, and sometimes I hear people talking about breathing exercises. Mindfulness breath awareness practice is not a breathing exercise. It is an exercise of becoming aware of one's breath. When I think of breathing exercise, for me at least, it has the connotation that somehow I work with my breath. For instance, I do some exercises to slow down my breath, to intensify my breath, to hold the breath at certain points and so on. This is not what is meant. These are different exercises. So of course, it also exists. It is basically to continue breathing naturally and just using the breath as an object. And in principle, actually, it can be any other object as well. Yeah? So the breath has some advantages. It doesn't give us a good excuse. So if I'm used to, for instance, if I'm used to using a nice stone or a candle as a meditation object or so, and say, this is what I meditate on, then I always have an excuse, oh, sorry, I'm on the bus, I didn't bring my candle, yeah, so I can't meditate, yeah. So, or whatever, yeah. So, but the breath, usually there's no excuse, yeah, it's always with us, yeah. That's very helpful. Another thing is actually to really experience the breath. Yeah? We have to pay attention. Yeah? I think I have been breathing for the whole day already. Yeah? But I wasn't much aware of this. Yeah? So, and I really have to slow down to be able to experience, for instance, the sensation of the breath at my nostrils. Yeah? If you want to try, maybe just take a moment. We have the time. So if we just take a moment and just focus on the sensation of the breath at the tip of our nose or nostrils. And then sooner or later, usually our mind gets some other ideas and starts wandering off. Yeah? Some thoughts, feelings, memories, hopes, hopefully it's over very soon, or expectations or whatever. Yeah? The mind engages with something else and just experiencing the sensation of the breath. And then sooner or later we recognize the mind has been doing so. And then one just, without any further elaboration, one just returns the focus of the attention to the sensation of the breath. And this one can do again, again, and again. So whenever our mind wanders off, we don't elaborate on it, but just bring it back to the sensation of the breath. Okay, so, and this is actually a very simple exercise. I wouldn't say it's always easy, because the mind can be quite wild, can have all kinds of ideas, so traditionally this mind wandering, it's usually subdivided into two categories. Either it's agitation, that the mind gets really wild and more thoughts, more ideas, or it is dullness. And so the practice here would be to be aware, or to become aware whether the mind drifts into dullness or into agitation, and then as soon as this is recognized, that one just returns to the object. And then sooner or later the mind drifts off again, one recognizes it sooner or later and returns to the object. And at the same, and what happens through this practice more or less automatically is that more sensitivity or more awareness arises for what is my mind doing right now. And in my understanding, this is actually one of the key points. As long as we are not really aware of where my mind is, where it is running, what it is engaging with, actually I think there's not so much freedom in how we direct our mind. So this, I think this is a key point, and from the perspective of, well, or maybe as a key point, then of course it gives us also the flexibility once we recognize that our mind engages with certain disturbing feelings, engages in rumination, whatever it might be. As soon as we recognize it and we practice to step away from this, return to the sensation of the breath, then through the exercise, through the practice, we gain this ability to recognize emotions, emotional states as they arise, and we recognize that there is, maybe one can say, some space around it or some freedom around it, that we can engage with them, but we don't have to engage with it. So, is this a...
in your description of what you're trying to set up as a kind of core mindfulness practice there, and something that I think is overdue and would be a really great research tool as well as a great practice, you touch on something that I think is not unproblematic around the notion of judgment. So you talk of distinguishing between agitation or dullness, and the Passion Sutta talks about judging between wholesome and unwholesome mind states within mindful meditation. Yet the kind of the definition from Kabat-Zinn that you put up earlier, the one that most kind of modern programs are working on, specifically talks about being non-judgmental. I wonder if you see that as a problem, or is there a conflict there?
Thank you. That's a very good question. Just 2 months ago, we had a whole summer school, 5 days, only talking about this topic, the judging mind. Well, not only in this meditation, but also in a wider context and discernment and so on. But this is actually, I think this is something that really requires careful consideration. So I think it's a question of how one instructs people. So I think that it is also about refining what exactly is meant with judgment. So if we think about the description John Kabat-Zinn gave that I put up earlier on, then to be non-judgmental, it doesn't mean to not be able to discern what state of mind I am in. I think at least, and I would be very surprised if he means this. Yeah? And all my reading of his writing doesn't suggest this. Yeah? So so it is not about not being aware of what is happening in the mind, but actually the judgment, I think that is meant there, it's more the affective, emotional component to it, of the judgment of liking or disliking. Yeah. So and in a way, then of course there's likes and dislikes. Yeah? So there's emotional tone to it. On the other hand, there's of course also maybe a more more neutral discernment, where kind of you say I'm in the meditation or I'm kind of not following the instructions. And I think actually there the descriptions that we often find in the secular world it's not clear enough, I think. Yeah? It somehow requires, in my understanding, it requires an awareness of what my mind is doing right now. But of course it is always a question also who is practicing this, who is being instructed in this. Yeah? So there can be actually large differences which aspect one emphasizes. Yeah? If one is in a situation or to take every mental state as one experiences as a reality, yeah, then maybe a course description of stepping away from judgment is very, very useful. If it's about refining mental states, then probably one needs to be more precise and say, well, usually one still goes with a purpose into the meditation practice, but actually if one looks at more advanced meditation instructions, then actually this purpose is the main obstacle for the practice. Yeah? And that really then depends on what one is talking about, who one is talking to, and who one is instructing. Yeah?
I wouldn't disagree with that.
Yeah.
I think that's great. One of my PhD students was trying to put a bare mindfulness practice together. So she could do a comparison between that and bare loving kindness meditation. And she was coming up with this sort of issue around the definition of exactly what it is. And the more I think about it, the more complex it becomes, because even now you're talking about beginning and advanced practitioners, and so mindfulness training is something that evolves, and it leaves us as researchers kind of fumbling still for a simple tool that we can use that will be comparable in any context. I
Yes.
don't have an answer, but it's just, problem.
Yeah, I mean, one answer is just very pragmatic, I think. That one says actually simplify it as much as possible, but we have to be aware that there's always a context. We can't move out of this. Yeah? And even if we give the clearest of instructions, even if we would come up with a pure mindfulness instruction, it is still given by a person to another person, and the context is always there, in a way. Yeah? So. But okay, but maybe not. There was another, yeah? Yeah. I mean, I think this is the introductory phase. Where maybe, I don't know if we have to talk about beginners or so, but actually when one first gets introduced to the idea, that when one starts on a more coarse level and then one moves to more subtle levels, possibly. Yeah. Well, probably we could just continue discussing this until the evening, but maybe. So, but maybe we're losing also half of all the people who don't know what I have in my mind here. So this is a kind of, in my mind at least, a relatively simple practice that focuses on some of the core issues. Yeah? And there, one can, we discussed already this question of being non-judgmental and discerning at the same time. Yeah? And also being free of expectations, but still expecting from oneself to practice. And I mean, there are many of these kind of conundrums which actually I think are quite funny. Yeah? And, but here now, coming back to this, I think one can describe this meditation process actually from the perspective of cognitive psychology very nicely. Yeah? So so we are focusing on the object, then we have this mind wandering, and that is sooner or later recognized. Ideally, one just recognizes it without likes and dislikes, and just returns to the object one wanted to focus on. But there's still the discernment: I am with the object, the breath, or I am not. Yeah? And then the part of this returning to the object, or the first part from the cognitive psychology perspective, is to let go of the distracting objects one was engaged with. Yeah? And this is emphasized here actually because there's a whole neurological condition that where colleagues think to a large extent this is based on the disability to let go. Yeah? And this is called visuospatial neglect. Yeah? That our attention is so pulled, usually because of a brain injury, is so our attentional system is so much affected that once our attention is attracted by one object, it is very difficult to disengage from it again. Yeah? To let go, to disengage and move somewhere else. Yeah? It's a serious condition with a lot of problems. Yeah? So, but here we let go and return to the object. Yeah? And then the same thing happens again and again. So cognitive psychologists call this sustaining attention, then distraction, there are various words, mind wandering or whatever one wants to say. Then there's a function of monitoring, then the disengaging I already mentioned, and the shifting of attention back to an object. Yeah? So neuroscientists, they have an idea which brain networks are involved in this. Don't worry, I'm not going into the details now with this, but there's a particular model of attentional networks, so different interconnected brain areas that actually are involved in carrying out these cognitive functions, and they are called, for instance, the alerting network, then the default mode network. Basically, the idea here is that the default mode is we are having inner chatter, blah, 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 blah. Yeah? So also sometimes called the resting state, yeah? Different terms for the same. Then there is a salience network, basically, that is, it is this ability supported by the network of brain areas to recognize something that is in our current state of importance. Yeah? So, and here, for instance, in this context of meditation, would be to recognize my mind is doing something else than I want it to do. Yeah? This would be a salient event, but this would also be a salient event. Yeah? So that where automatically then our attention system is attracted to. Yeah? And then executive control network that is involved in modulating our responses, engaging something we want to engage with, disengaging from other things we don't want to engage with, to deal with conflicting information. Yeah, should I do this or should I do that? And states like this. Yeah, and then the aspect also of orienting attention with the orienting network. Yeah, and here basically a few dots that give an idea that there are actually brain networks. Yeah? We are not going into this now. Yeah? So now this is a slide from Dusana. I put this in just to give an idea. Actually, there are different models how the process of mindfulness is described. Yeah? And here, this is a model of mindfulness related or change related to mindfulness practice by Shapiro et al. This is used quite widely, yeah? And there it distinguishes three components. So far we talked a lot about attention and also a bit about the attitude, where this non-judgmenting, accepting component or aspect comes in. But I think the very important point here is Shapiro et al. Make that actually there's a third component, intention. Yeah? And intention on the one hand relates to the intention I have on a moment-to-moment basis to really engage with whatever I practice with, or yeah. But also on a broader scale, the general intention that brings me to the mindfulness practice. Yeah? And as far as I know, this third aspect, intention, has not been studied in any depth yet. Yeah? But I think it's good to be aware that actually this is important, that it can make a big difference, I think, what brings the practitioner, what brings a client to the practice. If it is to reduce pain or to reach enlightenment, might be something else. And this is a model that is used very widely, and actually in this model also Shapiro, they emphasize a point that here Dusana, she put centrally the aspect of decentering. And this is now, I would say, within the mindfulness literature, a very hot topic. So you will find more and more publications about it, and different questionnaires that try to capture this ability to decenter. And it is, probably one can say, that, this ability to not fully identify with one's own mental states, to be able to see one's own emotions as something that the mind offers, but have the ability to internally step back and say, okay, it is something that comes, is experienced, and disappears again. So the ability to experience emotional states from a decentered perspective, not being fully identified with them. And emotion regulation, well, this, we talked about it, attention and executive function, this is where a lot of our research is dealing with. Dusana had something in her talk about language. I'm not quite familiar with this aspect of her research, so I don't want to say much about this. You have to listen to her talk later on. I have to leave something for her. And then, of course, the interactions also with the autonomous nervous system. There will be much more about this in her presentation that she will provide online. So this was all too simple for us, so we created something more complex. And so actually this is a bit of a map what I had a simpler version, and then Naomi, are you here? Yeah, what Naomi actually said, Peter, this is too simple. We have to expand this a bit. Yeah, so actually this is a bit of an idea, not so much a process model or anything like this, but basically let's just map out what we should study to really get an idea what mindfulness practice does and what it changes. Yeah? So, and I'm not going to talk about all of this. Basically we have here this recognition that there are motivational factors that influence the practice. Then we have the practice itself, and there are already questions, what is a mindfulness practice? So a lot of research can be about this. And then we have here in green the core processes where we think that these change through the practice, and then related to it also possible shift in one's perspective, for instance, a perspective on one's own emotional states, and insights about that different emotional states are possible, disengaging from them is possible, decentering is possible, and things like this. And then as a more lasting mental stance, this awareness that is non-reactive and doesn't automatically judge. Yeah? And then also, if we just think about the outcomes, of course, we only mention like 3 big areas: physical, mental well-being, and of behavioral outcomes. Yeah? And here at John Moores, we are actually particularly interested also in behavioral outcomes. For instance, Paul Latimore, his work, and Naomi as well, working actually on the influence of mindfulness on eating behavior. Yeah? So where we have all this and then look at the influences if it changes the behavior. And later I think Naomi will talk about it, and also has a poster actually that it does. For instance, after mindfulness induction, people eat less cookies. Yeah? So you will hear more about it from her. Yeah? And then one of our PhD students, Rebecca, she works with an intervention that is a brief mindfulness intervention delivered before women undergo surgery. Yeah? And so where actually we have already pilot data that show that they make a better recovery, and it might be less likely that these women develop chronic pain after surgery. So where it's a link between mental and physical well-being. We have studies looking at the well-being in the workplace, things like this. We have various people contributing to the work, especially about executive functions, attentional functions, and this is what I'm going to focus on as well. We have Kate, she's particularly working on interventions improving the mental well-being of carers, and she has a poster about this as well. And Laura, she's working on especially on body awareness, interoception, and so it related to physical and emotional well-being and things like this. So we try to cover quite a few of the aspects that we put together here, but only touching on them more or less lightly so far. Yeah? So, okay, let's remove all this. And now actually you might be interested also to see some data. Okay, well, I am interested to show you a few data at least. So a lot of the research that is kind of central to me actually is concerned with the question, does mindfulness practice increase attentional functions, let's say attentional flexibility? Yeah, because kind of this seems to be one of the core aspects to it. So if we really want to capture what the practice is about, maybe it makes sense to start with something that is really in all definitions of mindfulness practice, it's always there as a core principle. Yeah? And also I used to be an attention researcher, so it was kind of natural to move in this direction. Yeah? So this is nothing new. So if we go back kind of 1700 years, a great scholar, probably he would have won several, a Buddhist scholar, he would have probably won several Nobel Prizes, chair in Harvard and so on, if he was alive these days. Yeah? Or, I don't know, maybe invented an even better iPhone, so I have no idea. But from the writings, he's actually very highly regarded in Buddhism, and basically he talks about mindfulness in this way. Mindfulness and introspection are taught for the first, so mindfulness prevents attention from straying from the meditative object, while the second recognizes that the attention is straying. Yeah? So basically what I tried to talk about here in cognitive terms before actually is more or less the same what has been said 1700 years ago. Yeah? So there it might make sense to briefly introduce a term called shamatha, and sometimes translated as quiescence or calm abiding. And it's basically defined as an attentional state in which hindrances of excitation and laxity have been thoroughly calmed. So in within the Buddhist context, there's the idea there is a state of mind where there's no excitation, so no agitation and no dullness, excitation and laxity. So there's a nice review paper by Tang, Hölzel, and Posner, basically, where they also state actually that there are different stages of development. And here they make it simple, just in 3 stages: early, middle, and advanced, yeah, from effortful practice to effortless being. Yeah. If one looks into the Buddhist scriptures, then this is, for instance, described in much detail by another scholar. I think he lived around the 7th century, and he talks about 10 stages. Yeah? This is exciting because now scientists actually think, oh, can we somehow find these stages? Yeah? But if one then looks at the definition, so, well, here are some ways of describing this. Here, on the first 3 stages, the mind is like a cascading waterfall. Yeah? So very wild, all kinds of emotions going on. Then it calms down a bit, like a quickly flowing river, quickly flowing through a gorge, then a river flowing through a valley, then like the ocean with no waves, and then later on a mountain. Yeah? So, and this is actually what, from a Buddhist perspective, the mindfulness practice and samadhi, shamatha practice, actually what it aims at. Yeah? That the mind becomes like a mountain, completely unshakable. Yeah? So to go just a little bit more detail how this is explained, the third stage, for instance, one still forgets the meditative object entirely for brief periods. Yeah? So one is meditating, and suddenly, what was I meditating on, and so. And recently we meditated at home, and then both we discussed, were we still meditating, or what? Do you remember? Yes. So on the seventh stage, subtle imbalances of attention are swiftly rectified. The eighth stage still takes effort to ward off excitation and laxity. And then in more detail, the eighth stage, single-pointed attention. You can now sustain a high level of samadhi or highly focused attention, free of the imbalances of even the subtlest laxity and excitation for at least 3 hours or so. Yeah? So this is kind of when it's a bit more advanced. Only the slightest degree of effort at the beginning of each session is needed to ward off these obstacles, and you continue in your practice motivated by the power of enthusiasm. Yeah? Mm-hmm. So here basically it's clearly described. 3 hours, one just decides, okay, now I focus on my breath, and 3 hours later. So for me it's hard to fathom why it's 3 hours and not 4 hours. So what happens after these 3 hours, I'm not quite sure. Yes, so but maybe I'll get there one day. So, but actually the descriptions also say that something like this cannot be achieved while engaging in normal life. So these later stages, I think from 7 on also, these are stages where one actually withdraws from life for a while to really focus on this practice. Yeah? So basically doing this in retreat. It's maybe also worth mentioning. So in our research, we focus on the very early stages. Yeah? First of all, for practical reasons, but also to see how things develop. Yeah? And I rush you through 4 studies. One where our participants trained 3 weeks mindful breath awareness practice compared to a control group. And actually Geraldine, she trained the participants there for this study. Then an 8-week study where we compared mindful breath awareness with brain gym exercises that you can buy in a shop. Yeah? So especially for people who are not the youngest anymore, 55 to 75. And then another 8-week study where we compared breath awareness with muscle relaxation, and a 16-week study where we compared mindful breath awareness with a waitlist control group. So, and I'm rushing through some of the results because they all deal with something very similar, and I will always indicate from which study these are from, with these labels in the top left, you will see them. Yeah? So, and the main question is always, are there changes to attentional functions from before to after training? Yeah? And are these changes specific to the meditation group compared to the control group? And the main outcome measure we use there, I'm reporting now, are so-called event-related potentials. We record the electrical activity from the scalp of the participants while they engage in certain attention tasks. Yeah? And so this is how it looks like. Yeah? So, and what we know, after some processing of the data that we record there, then we arrive at signals that look like this. So here, let's say here's an event, and then afterwards the amplitudes go down, up, down, up, down, up, and so on. Yeah? And so not surprisingly, the positivities are called P, and the negativities are called N, and then they're just numbered, P1, P2, P3, yeah, and one can also label them by the time point they are appearing, yeah, and N1, N2, N3. And there's a lot of research from cognitive neuroscience where we have a good idea what within a specific context or related to a specific task, these P's and these N's, yeah, these amplitudes or these electrical components, what they actually mean. Yeah? Sometimes people ask, so is it better to have P's than N's, yeah? More positive or negative? This is, it's just the electrical polarity. Yeah? It's not positive and negative in this sense, so stay non-judgmental about it. Yeah? So it's just, yeah, in which direction the electrical field points. Yeah? So, and then one can also localize here, this is the head of the participant, the nose here and the ears. Yeah? One can localize where on the head the maximum of such components are. Yeah? And then questions we can ask is whether in the different conditions, for instance, before and after training, there is a change in the amplitude. One can also look at changes in the latency, so the time point when a certain amplitude peaks and so on. Yeah? And so the 16-week study we did, actually there, participants took part in the Stroop task, and most of you will know this, but I mentioned it briefly. One just has to name the color a word is printed in. Yeah? So red, brown, blue, green, blue, red. Okay? So, and if you try it, and I've tried this for years, I still feel the effect, yeah, that it just takes a bit longer and it's a bit more difficult if we have such incongruent conditions like down here. Yeah? So, and then we record response time, and in this now I show you the N2 effect, so the second negativity posterior, so a bit to the back of the head, and here just the amplitudes, how they look like. Yeah? So before the training, after 8 weeks, and after 16 weeks at the end of the training. And here actually for this N2 we don't find a difference for the congruent and incongruent condition. Yeah? But just a general effect that in the meditation group the amplitude increases, whereas in the control group the amplitude decreases over time. Yeah? So don't be concerned about the slight difference at the start. This is an effect of randomization. People have different brains, yeah? So that the amplitudes are not always exactly the same. It's a question of the trend in which direction it goes. Yeah? And we have the statistics to see whether these trends are significant or not. Yeah? So here we see an increase, and in the control group in blue we see a decrease of this amplitude, and we know that in this case this amplitude is related to the selectivity of attention, especially in relation to language and color stimuli. Yeah? And what we see is, so as a result of the training, the ability to really select the relevant information increases in the meditators. Yeah? Yeah? We see it, the trend being there at 8 weeks and then increasing further up to 16 weeks. Then for another component, the P3 component, so the third positivity in this case, for the congruent stimuli, yeah, where red printed in red, for instance, so we don't see much of a clear pattern. Yeah? But for the incongruent one, which makes more sense with this particular P3 component, what we see actually is that after 8 weeks, there's no real difference between control and mindfulness group. Yeah, but what we see is actually for the control group, this amplitude to continue increasing, whereas we see in the mindfulness group that from 8 to 16 weeks the amplitude drops off. Yeah? And the interesting thing is actually that this N2 component I showed you before, the increase in the N2 component is correlated with a decrease in the P3 component. So the better the participants are able to select the information, the fewer brain power, maybe a bit colloquial, the fewer brain resources are needed, yeah, so the amplitude goes down here to resolve the conflict that is present in the stimulus. Okay? So the control processes actually that are needed to override the automatic response, yeah, that is triggered by the word that is present, yeah, to override this and respond in a different way. It's actually improved. Yeah. Alistair. Say again. Weightless control group. Yeah.
Why is the control group in the incongruent condition having increases in amplitude over this weightless period?
I don't know. We didn't manipulate anything yet, so, and there are not many studies or I'm not aware of any studies that just look at what happens over time with such amplitudes. It could be just a training effect, but the specificity is not quite clear to me. Yeah? David?
Just to follow up on the question, but I was going to ask, that would be part one of my question. The second part of it was going to be, do you see any difference in reaction times across the...
In this, we didn't. In this study, not.
No,
we didn't see. Yeah. In another study we did before we did, yeah? But in this case, not.
And you get that increase in reaction times for the control group?
No.
So
No.
So
No.
just the difference between the controls and the mindfulness groups is all the training?
Yes. So another study, yeah? And this is one of the most simple studies you can imagine. Yeah? So a traffic light is presented on the screen. It's green, you press a button. It's red, you don't press a button, okay? So, and in 75% of the cases, green, you press a button, and from time to time, quarter of the cases, you have to withhold the response. Yeah? So imagine you press a button, it comes relatively rapidly, yeah? Press a button, and then from time to time you stop. Yeah? Okay, and this is basically the ability. It's about the ability to inhibit an automatic response. Yeah? And what we know is from a lot of research that in this so-called no-go trials, where we don't press a button, this P3 component is enlarged. Yeah? And so what we were interested in is to see whether this changes as a result of training. Yeah? And of course, I show you this, and it does change after 3 weeks of practice. Yeah? So here's a slight difference at the start, but we see a reduction in the control group and a slight increase in the meditation group. So we did a similar study. Okay, improved response inhibition, and in this case also we also saw it in the accuracy data. Yeah? The same effect. And a similar study over 8 weeks, or a similar paradigm, over 8 weeks, but with different stimuli. So a few letters where one presses, and other letters where one withholds the response, and we see again the same P3 component increasing in the meditation group, and a tendency to decrease in the control group. Yeah, basically. And this was in older participants, so just showing that also if we are already over 55, there is still some flexibility in our brain. Yeah, so again, an indicator of improved response inhibition, again also present in the behavioral data. So here then, we also looked at something else. Yeah? So actually, what happens when the participants press the button, although they should have withheld the response? Yeah? And there we know that this triggers the so-called ERN, error-related negativity. Yeah? So when it's, this feeling, you realize you have made a mistake. Yeah? And so we see here actually that this ERN, so basically now this is related to the button press, not the presentation of the stimulus. Yeah? But so the button was pressed incorrectly. Yeah? So, and what we see here actually is the amplitude, this negativity. Yeah? We can see it here also from before the training to after the training, the negativity increases, yeah, which is actually considered to be a marker of the ability to monitor one's own responses. Yeah? And this also, again, the same study basically after 3 weeks of practice. Yeah? So these were all pretty simple exercises, yeah, just press a button. Now actually we said, okay, let's challenge the system a bit. Yeah? And we used the so-called multiple object tracking task, and this was the study was carried out in Germany by co-workers of mine. And here is what the participants had to do. Yeah? So a display was presented actually with 15 dots, yeah? And between 2 or 5 of these dots were marked in red. Okay? And the task was, the participants knew soon these dots will start moving randomly, yeah? And you track these 2 to 5 circles, dots that have been marked, yeah? And after a few seconds we ask you if you tracked it correctly. Okay, so between 2 and 5 of them are marked, then for a while the marks disappear, and then all the dots start moving randomly, yeah? For about 8 seconds. 15 dots moving all the same color, and then they stop, and the participants are asked, yeah, with a probe, was this one of the dots you followed or not? Yeah? So do you get the idea? Yeah? You know, 5 dots, let's say, they are marked in red. The red disappears, the dots start moving for 8 seconds, and then it's was one of the dots that was marked. Yeah? So with 1, maybe it's not so difficult. Yeah? With 2, 3, 4, yeah, it gets very difficult. Yeah? Okay, so it really requires sustained attention. It requires spatial working memory. the task is clear. Yeah. So, and then basically we recorded the EEG, and from these electrodes, basically when we look at the back of the head, the electrodes here, this is where, I forgot one thing. It was a bit more complicated than this. Actually, these dots were also flickering, yeah, at around 11 hertz, on and off. In this way, we drive a brain response. It's called a steady-state visual evoked potential. Basically, you have the brain response with the same frequency as the flickering stimulation you have. Yeah? So, and this gives a very nice signal, and we've done a lot of studies showing that this is actually related to attention. Yeah? So, and how one pays attention. So, and first of all, the accuracy. Yeah? 8 weeks of practice comparing mindfulness group to a progressive muscle relaxation group. Yeah? 8 weeks of practice, the accuracy improves significantly in the mindfulness group, but not in the active control group. And then the amplitude of this oscillating response, yeah, we see no change in the control group, and the amplitude completely goes down, yeah, is significantly reduced over this 8-second period, yeah, reduced in the mindfulness group. Yeah? And what we think what this means is actually that fewer neural resources are required to solve this task. Yeah? So that actually the brain networks that are relevant there, actually that they are sharpened more, and fewer neurons, if you want, yeah? Fewer neurons are needed to solve the task. And as we see from the accuracy data, actually they're solving it in a better way. Yeah? So, and this is a task that is much more challenging than any of the other tasks we have used before, and we see actually then with a more sensitive task, actually we see stronger effects than in more simple tasks. Yeah? And I'm actually quite excited about these new results, that they come out that clearly of the reduction in this. Mm-hmm.
Can you describe how when doing these kind of tests, are you asking the subjects to do it quickly or to get it right?
To get in this, it depends a little bit on the task. Yeah? So in this, the last one, there was no timing in there. Yeah? They just have to get it right. They can think as long as they want. Yeah? But in the other ones, when it's about pressing the button, yeah, then usually we look at, well, depending on the particular paradigm. Yeah? But usually we ask participants to balance speed and accuracy. It depends on the specific paradigm. Okay? So, so what did we find so far with a simple mindful breath awareness practice? I think we found actually some effects on control, attentional control functions. First, basically what I showed you, that inhibitory control improves. So overriding the response in the Stroop task, yeah, with the color words, inhibiting the execution of a response with these different go-no-go tasks. The error-related negativity, yeah, so monitoring of one's own performance. Actually, oh yeah, okay, I have this as well. And then actually also the improved spatial attention and involved working memory in the multiple object tracking task. Yeah? So, and one thing actually what I think is quite interesting is what the participants did. They only practiced focusing on the breath. Yeah? This is something very different to multiple object tracking. Yeah? So the breath, actually, it's only here. Yeah? It is not moving around like whizzing through space or something like this. Yeah? And still we see improvement there. Yeah? So it's not that they practice a go, no-go task or something like this. Yeah? They just focus on the breath for 3 weeks, 8 weeks, 16 weeks. And what I didn't mention at the beginning, we ask them usually to do this for 10 or 15 minutes a day, 5 times a week. Yeah? And what we see is after 3 weeks, moderate effects on inhibitory control and performance monitoring. After 8 weeks, effects on inhibitory control and resolving response conflicts, and then also effects on working memory and spatial attention. Yeah, also after 8 weeks. And in a way, actually, this is not so common in cognitive psychology and cognitive neuroscience, that one gets such a transfer effect, yeah, that one trains one task and gets an effect on something quite similar. And I think it indicates that actually what is practiced here is something that is very it's very at the core or very central to our experience. Yeah? Oh, these are slides from Dusana. I don't remember what this is about. I think we leave this out. Actually, I talked long enough. I think we need a break anyway. Yeah? So I made really ruthless use of the time now. I hope you don't mind. So just to mention briefly where the funding, at least for our research, came from so far, and then all the people actually who did all the work. Yeah, some of the former and current PhD students, and Geraldine, who did the training for one of the studies, and then some other co-workers from abroad. And from these people I learned everything about neuroscience, and from these people I learned everything about meditation. And thank you for listening. And if you want to read, sometimes I have time to write blog. I didn't blog for a while, but it will start soon again. So if you want to, sometimes I comment on research that is happening in the world. Yeah? So if you're interested in this here, you can find me. Okay, thank you very much. Yeah.